It's wonderful to see you all here. Welcome to our panel where we'll be discussing the 2024 SANS and GIAC Cyber Workforce Research Report. We have some flyers up in front of the room here. Some of you have taken them. If you haven't, you can pick one up on your way out. But it is a flyer that describes this workforce report, this analysis that SANS has done with several great partners. It really is a compelling read. Has anybody here read it yet out there? We released it, what, about 2-3 months ago? Well, you guys have read it.
Yep.
Yeah, it's about 2 or 3 months ago. It'll take you 15 or 20 minutes to read it. It has some very surprising results that we'll be summarizing here, and very useful results. I've asked each of our who am I? My name is Ed Scotus. I am the president of the SANS Technology Institute College. Our college has over 2,000 students now, about half at the undergraduate level and half at the graduate level. And I have been with SANS for 25 years. In fact, just a couple of months ago was my 25th anniversary at SANS. Now, as you know, this is SANS' 35th anniversary. So happy birthday, SANS, 35 years. But I'm going to be hosting this panel with these folks. These are excellent individuals with all kinds of knowledge to share about how to build and maintain the cybersecurity workforce. I've asked each of our panelists, make sure you keep a focus on very practical tips, advice that folks in this audience can use to keep their workforce really focused and doing great stuff, highly skilled, highly motivated. That's what this is all about. And I did ask each of them to bring some ideas that you would want to write down. So you might want to be prepared to take some notes. But let me introduce to you our esteemed panel here. Thank you for doing this. We appreciate it, folks. Immediately to my left, your right, is Brian Correa with the SANS Institute. Brian, in his previous job, was the managing director for North America for ISC Squared. And he was also formerly a director of business development and venue planning. But now he, at the SANS Institute, doing business development, sales, marketing, event management, contracts. He is one of the earliest SANS employees. How many years, Brian, with SANS?
I started in 2000.
So about 24 years.
The question is, do you count the years that I was gone from ISC Squared?
I will count. 24 years. So
Yep.
He's the new guy. I'm 25 years in.
I started when I was 12.
Yes. All right. Next, thank you, Brian, for being here. Next, we're also joined by Karen Wetzel, who is with the NICE and NIST organization. So with the NIST organization, working on the NICE framework. Karen is the lead for the NICE Workforce Framework for Cybersecurity at the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, under the U.S. Department of Commerce. She's doing some really cool stuff. I can't wait to hear what she has to say. In this role, she sets strategy for and leads efforts around the development, improvement, and application of an integrated ecosystem for cybersecurity education, training, and workforce development. She has nearly 20 years experience in developing technology standards and leading practices. She specializes in community engagement, collaborating with stakeholders and subject matter experts to identify, communicate, and develop guidance, tools, and resources. Karen, I'm so glad that you're here. Thank you. Next up, we have Matt Swenson, who has recently joined the Center for Internet Security. He is manager of operational security services at CIS, the Center for Internet Security. He provides strategic direction and oversight of the daily operations of the Security Operations Center, Computer Incident Response Center, Cyber Threat Intelligence, Vulnerability Management, stakeholder engagement on behalf of CIS for the multi-state ISAC, the Information Sharing and Analysis Center. That's a heavy workload there. Before his tenure at CIS, Matt Swenson served in various private sector roles, including as the Chief Executive Officer, North America for Black Rainbow, Inc., on which your case study associated with the workforce study was based. He's also Senior Vice President of Digital Forensics and Incident Response at Cadian Cyber Response. I tell you, Matt has done a lot of things here. He was also a special agent for Homeland Security investigations, where he retired after 20 years with law enforcement as a division chief of the HSI Cyber Division. So thank you. Glad you're here, Matt. Next, we have Dr. Austin Cusack from CISA. He's a cybersecurity education and talent development professional with a breadth of experience ranging from security operations to keynote speaking. He has a background in public diplomacy. Dr. Cusack supports CISA as a leading development expert and training program manager while also instructing junior technical staff in the art and science of leadership. In his research, Dr. Cusack is focused on professionalization of the cybersecurity workforce through transitioning technical workers into first-time leaders. He's a joy to work with, really interesting character, and just a lot of fun. So thank you, Dr. Cusack, Austin, for being here. And last but certainly not least, we have my dear friend, Jay Belodia from Microsoft. He leads a team of over 100 security architects, engineers, operators, and managers as the managing director of Microsoft's federal customer success organization. With more than 20 years of experience, Jay brings a practitioner's perspective to cyber workforce management. He has developed cybersecurity organizations and programs, and he is a passionate advocate for recruiting and enhancing workforce expertise and culture. Thank you for being here, Jay. Appreciate it. Jay and I have great conversations about how you build a great cybersecurity organization, how you motivate them. He's very insightful on this stuff. But to get it all started, oh, and we will open it up for your questions later, so please get ready to very loudly ask questions, okay? But we'll start with Brian. Brian, you were instrumental in this workforce study. So can you tell us kind of how it all came about and what it is?
Yeah, sure. So when we first developed this workforce study, I'll admit there was a little bit of some frustration that was going on. In other words, everybody talked about a headcount gap problem, but nobody ever talked about what that gap was, right? So part of the idea behind this workforce study was to now talk about what the problems were in that headcount gap problem, the skills, the expectations, things along those lines, but also to offer solutions. So the people that did the case studies, the idea was, hey, we saw so many studies, they talk about the data and that's it. We wanted to really add like real world stories that kind of backed it up and things along those lines. So the whole SANS philosophy that goes back to Alan Powler of, hey, there's something you could walk away with that you could apply to your office. So it was, I would say it was far from perfect, but the idea was, gosh, if I see another study that says the headcount gap problem is 5,000, 5 million, 5 billion, right? Like, let's talk about more of what that is. And there were, I think what was nice about the study was there was some very interesting things that came out of that.
It really was. It's good. Yeah, please do read those case studies. They're for organizations like Amazon, Microsoft has a case study in there. CISA, thank you, Austin. There's some great case studies. Leidos has a case study in there, and several others. So Brian, thanks for sharing that with us. I'd like to turn to Karen next. Now, Karen, you don't have a case study in there about NICE, but so much of that workforce study turns on coming up with or utilizing a common definitional framework for skills and capabilities and job roles. That sounds like something you're really involved with. Can you tell us more about that?
It's our bread
Very
and
nice,
butter.
huh?
Absolutely. It is really important to have that common language, to be able to have that common basis on which you mentioned it, all the players in this ecosystem can work together. If you don't have education and training providers understanding what work is necessary, you're not going to be hiring them. You're not going to be getting them the right education that is needed, the skills that are needed in order to do those work. So having that defined out for them to use is important. Having it defined for the employers who are looking to hire at different kinds of levels, and not necessarily only based on a degree that maybe someone had 15 years ago and who knows if it's relevant now. We want to base on today's skills and capabilities in order to have that and define that, particularly for those people who are maybe in HR and who aren't intimately involved in the day-to-day workings of what these are. It's working with the HR managers and understanding what those skills are defined in a framework like the NICE framework. It helps with that skills-based hiring, and it helps also with retention by building out pathways into these careers, by making sure that we're not losing people because we're not giving them ways to grow. And so having that really is foundational to all of the questions that came up in the study.
I think of the NICE framework as just a foundational tool that we can all use to talk about and hire people for specific roles. And also, the people themselves can better understand their own roles and what is expected of them by looking at what the NICE framework sets forth. So thank you for your instrumental work there. Yeah, Brian.
And Ed, I was going to say what was interesting out of the workforce study. So there was two audiences, people that headed up security team leads and then HR managers. And so one of the questions that was asked of both groups was, because one of the complaints is one's on Venus, one's on Mars. So the idea was, could we get them both on Earth together? Was, what do you want to see from the other side? And the number one on both sides for HR managers and security team leads was standardization of work roles, which was something we did not expect. And it was actually very high. Like, it was, compared to the other categories, it was by far. It came in at like 37 and like 31%.
You know, it might be useful for people to hear from you, Brian, a little bit about how you did the data gathering for this workforce study and the analysis of that.
Yeah. So we did hire an outside company just so that way that it would be above board, things along those lines. So the good news is SANS has a really good database of people in security. Maybe where we're lacking a little bit is on the HR side. So we did bring in an organization called SHRM. So SHRM is actually located not too far from here. SHRM is known as solely as the lead HR association here in the US.
Do you remember what it stands for? I hate to put you on the spot.
Oh,
SH
Society of HR
Managers?
Management. Yeah,
Okay.
that sounds of managers. So he did that to me last time and I was sweating that one time too. Um, just don't ask me what SAN stands for.
I got that one. I got that one.
But we brought in SHRM to kind of really help kind of build up the HR. And so the idea was to get both perspectives.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's move to Matt next. So Matt, you have a microphone? Let's get a microphone. Oh, good. Awesome. So Matt, tell us about your case study and the very particular takeaways from it.
So we had a little bit of I think a unique case study in that I was representing law enforcement, and we're not necessarily a cyber agency, or at least cyber is not necessarily what you would think about in terms of our number one priority. And so as we were trying to basically augment our existing special agents and intelligence analysts and positions that are traditionally law enforcement specific, we had to start adding brand new positions. And to Karen's point, the positions, they don't exist. Not only do they exist, when you go to HR and you say, hey, I want this position, it's going to be an IT cybersecurity specialist or cyber operation officer or whatever, they have these buckets of duties and roles that are assigned to all of the positions within an agency. And, you know, we're a very large agency, more than 10,000 people. And you look at them and you're like, hey, these don't fit what I need. So there's a lot of work that has to be done from the ground up and really thinking about these types of positions from a whole new perspective. The government is very rigid. It's not like the private sector, like where I'm at now, where it's like, hey, I want to go hire a person. Boom, I just create a job description out of thin air and write whatever I want in there and go hire whoever I need to hire. You have to have a job description. It has to be a certain GS series. It has to, you know, there's just a whole bunch to it. So creating that from the ground up was very, very, very challenging for us.
Indeed, indeed. Austin, tell us about your case study and particular areas of focus on it.
So I would say, I mean, my case study was a little bit all over the place, but
There was a lot of useful stuff in it.
well, thank you. I thought so
It's
too.
true. It's true.
One of the interesting bits of my case study was that I was able to actually do research internal. So I was able to do a lot of doctoral work on the people inside the agency. And I was trying to figure a lot of things out, like why are we losing people? Why are some people that are being promoted not succeeding in their first leadership role? How are these things happening? And I started to see these trends start to continue to pop up, and I started to notice where the gaps were. And so, like, for example, when Karen was talking about how the NICE framework has career paths, right? And it gives this guidelines for it. We didn't have one internally, so we had to make one. We had to figure out, okay, so we've got these two different big buckets, two different tracks, technical, non-technical. And in those tracks, we've got multiple branches. Are you going to do a management track on the technical side? You need management leadership. Are you going to be more of a technical leader? Or are you going to be just really deeply technical? And these are three different tracks. Well, what does each step of that look like? So it was almost in a sense gamifying what these career tracks could look like so that we could then plug them back into the NICE framework. And then one of the other things that we were noticing, or in my study that I talked about a bit more, was to Karen's point, our HR and our cyber managers don't talk to each other. There's some salvos where things are thrown at each other in emails, but then there's no coordination. They are not speaking the same language. To Matt's point, HR is using OPM guidelines. Boom. And then the hiring manager is like, I don't know what to do with any of this stuff. So then they're doing their own thing, and it just causes this big kerfuffle.
I see that all over the place.
So,
Absolutely.
so getting them to have that common lexicon, but also training both of them together so that they actually work together as teams. And one of the things I think CISA did really well, opinions of Austin, not of DHS. I think CISA did this really well. They actually dedicated people specifically to working with the cyber workforce. Like if we're bringing in a cyber person, because now we're talking about, are they coming from a non-traditional place? Do I actually need somebody with this that has a college degree? No, I don't. Like, how am I going to test them and assess this person? So hence we have the cyber talent management system now. So it's not perfect, but it's starting to work. So
Excellent. Those are really good, insightful things. When I read the case study and talked with Austin about some of its findings, the number one finding, what motivates employees? Well, money. Okay, right. So salary. But number two is career path. And it made me reflect on my own team. And do I give them enough of a career path, enough advice on that? And I found myself saying, I don't. I'm kind of falling short on that. I got to improve that. So there's a lot of stuff like that in this workforce study that'll get you thinking. And speaking of that, Jay, can you tell us about your case study and particular points of focus there?
Yeah, I love the cyber workforce conversation. I try to bring the practitioner's perspective on that. I've run and led various organizations and teams and programs, and so I try to. We need to know that the gap in the number of people in the industry is X million. What I try to focus on is what do I need to put in my requisition so that I can hire the right person. So I try to make it really practical. I have two experiences that I kind of shared in the case study. Before, obviously, the time at Microsoft, we built a new organization focused on security and what did that entail? Taking professionals that were maybe tangential to security, working things like directory services or endpoint management and saying, we're going to make you a cyber professional. What does that look like? And you have a big brand name of Microsoft, you can draw and recruit and retain talent in different ways. I also took the perspective that I had when I was a director of the line of business for cybersecurity for a small business called Imagine IT, and sharing what that difference in journey is where, look, we didn't have that brand name, but what we focused on is passion and motivation, hiring people that really were looking for their break in security. And as a result of that, they were really super committed to what we were doing. And we gave them kind of that opportunity and just taking someone who's passionate and growth minded and building them up. So two different sides of the picture in what the cyber workforce looks like.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. So I open this one up to anyone who wants to answer it. Maybe a couple of you will give your perspective on it. Just throw your hand up there. I see this all the time. I'm sure our audience sees it too. Maybe you're reading stuff on X or a blog or something like that. And there's a classic problem in our industry. There are a lot of job recs out there that require many years of experience. And that frustrates people that are new to cyber. I mean, you've seen it. Hey, we need an intro pen tester, junior pen tester, 5 years experience required. It's like, well, hey, junior with 5 years experience? How can hiring managers better handle those with significant skill, but maybe not as much experience? Thoughts on that?
I'm happy to jump in on that.
Yeah, let's do Jay first and
Okay.
then Karen, you good? Okay.
Yeah, and I've got an interesting story on that as well, because I think we need to align, really hyper focus on aligning the requirement to what's necessary for that position. Do we need X years of? I love whenever I see a requisition that says, "Hey, I need 10 years of experience in Sentinel." Well, the product hasn't been around for that long, so it's a very interesting situation. One of the things that we focus on is, instead of saying, and just practically what my team and I have done, is instead of saying experience with, we've tried to use interest in as much as we can. Instead of saying, hey, Microsoft Sentinel, SIM, XDR, CASB, talk about the context of the technology rather than a specific product. Open that conversation to a lot more people. And then the other thing I'd say here is, ask people to apply. And if you're promoting your requisitions, your opportunities on social media, ask people to apply and put in that language, please apply even if you don't meet all the requirements. please let us decide if you're qualified instead of you weeding yourself out. Because in their industry studies that have shown this, that those that are from diverse backgrounds are less inclined, women in particular, are less inclined to apply to a position if they don't meet all the requirements. And you're not getting the best candidates. I said I got a little story. We had a gentleman that applied to our position, got knocked out by our recruiting system, multiple times applied, and then they reached out to a friend and said, "Hey, I'm not able to interview." And we said, "Why?" They funneled that back my way. Turns out that our requirement for the degree was a technical degree, and they had a degree in art. Guess what? That's the person that got the job offer. So you can always learn, you can always grow, but make sure the requirements are what's necessary for that role.
Yeah, those are very practical things. I mean, kind of stuff you want to write down. First, summarizing, Jay, being careful when you write your job requirements to not make them so specific that it rules people out. And secondly, encouraging people to apply even if they don't meet 100% of the requirements, because you might find a real gem there. So that's super valuable. Karen?
Everything that you've said is exactly spot on. We came up with last year, we produced a document on an employer's guide on writing job descriptions. It was really speaking about this, and it uses a nice framework as part of that, but really thinking about those things about, yes, what is actually required, but also what's required on day one versus day maybe 100. So what are you going to build in to make sure that you are not only hiring someone, but you're hiring someone and giving them a successful way of making sure they find their way in this job? Because nobody's going to come in to any new job being 100% on that day one. They don't know where the bathroom is down the hall, but you expect them to know everything else. I mean, it's just, you have to be realistic with expectations. And so it's understanding that and being realistic about how do you not only bring them in the door, but support them once they're in the door so that they are going to be successful. And that could be through things like mentoring. It could be through programs like apprenticeship programs. And it could be also about making sure that the people who are applying for these jobs also are aware of this, so that they are aware that they can apply, even if it doesn't look like they maybe fit everything right away, but also that they're using that same common language. We see a lot of times people who are new into the field have a lot of experience, whether it's in things like competitions or after school clubs or other kinds of, capture the flag approaches. How to explain that those are hands-on experiences that are valuable and can be something that should be considered in the hiring process is important too.
Absolutely. And that opens up another area that I'd like to ask Austin about, if that's okay. So, CTFs, after-school competitions, this brings up the idea of looking for alternative paths into the workforce where you can find very skilled or at least very capable people with the aptitude. Can you talk about alternative routes in? If you wanted to follow up with something that Karen just said as well, but I'd like to open that discussion up and maybe get Matt's thoughts on that too. Where can you find additional people via non-traditional routes?
So that's always going to be one of our challenges, as Jay talks about in his case study. There's this top tier talent and they are able to move around a lot, and we keep focusing on this top tier talent, and we get frustrated. When we think about us as a profession and we're like, all right, where did we all come from? Did everybody here go to a 4-year academic program for cybersecurity? Probably not. I certainly didn't. We've come from a lot of different areas and we continue to come from different areas, and yet we're all here. Well, how do we do that better? Right now, we have community colleges that are starting to join the Certified Academic Center of Excellence. Businesses are partnering with the community college and helping them enter an apprenticeship program or an internship program. That's instant right there, because a lot of what we do is it's an art form based in science and data, and it takes time for us to gain that art form. It takes time for us to figure out how to do that. So you look at groups like NPower, you look at groups like Cyber Warrior, these large non-traditional training programs where they're screening people for technical confidence. Are they confident enough to keep cracking at this? Do they have this acumen to actually do this type of work? They train them and then they place them into internships, they place them into apprenticeships, and they go out to the businesses for their people and say, hey, would you take on some of our people? If it works out, hire them. So people are starting to do this, and we're starting to grow more and more of these non-traditional training programs especially in the community college, because they've already got the infrastructure. They can have evening courses for current professionals that want to reclass. Well, are your businesses connected with CAE schools, community colleges? Are you connected to these non-traditional training programs like NPower? If not, just sign up to be one of the people that accepts their interns. And then you can grow that person slowly. You can train them because they've already been screened for technical acumen.
That's great. That's really good stuff. I find interacting with community colleges has been tremendously good for me in identifying interns, potential future hires, also identifying potential students for the SANS college too.
Oh yeah, going to hackathons. I
Hackathons,
forgot about
awesome.
that.
Yeah.
Like we've got the NCCDC, which is the Collegiate Cybersecurity Competitions. Any of us can pay a little bit of money and we can go there and interact with all these college students who are currently really, really good at what they do and they are hungry for something. You can also work with the US Cyber Games. They accept volunteers as a mentor or a coach. You don't have to sign on to be a full-time coach. You can just be a mentor for the absolute best 15 to 25-year-old cybersecurity professionals in the United States. They are the best. They're representing America abroad in cybersecurity games. Get access to them. Hire directly. Work with them.
And that's building the future and paying it forward, and also selfishly getting great candidates for hiring. Yeah. Thank you. Matt, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree with Austin. I think academia in general has lagged behind the need for cybersecurity professionals. I mean, you know, when I went to college in the mid-90s, there was no cybersecurity degree or whatnot. It was computer science, computer engineering, and then like a management information systems type degree, which was like your IT degree. And so, you know, but then we started to see, I think around the early 2000s, as we had more and more and more data breaches and this need for IT security capacity building, that there was no mechanism for somebody to come through the traditional educational route and get that level of experience. It just wasn't being taught. And so you had a lot of government agencies and the military basically have to build that capacity out themselves and teach people what they needed to wait for academia to come in and build that. And even when they did build it, it wasn't that highly respected. A lot of the cybersecurity programs and master's programs and whatnot, it wasn't thought of as being a very technical, hands-on, practitioner-based programs. So what we had to do, which I discuss in our study, is we had to build our own capacity where we took regular run-of-the-mill special agents without any background in computer science or computer engineering and basically send them to a standalone academy where 8 hours a day they would learn nothing but digital forensics. And then we would do the same thing for incident response. And then what we ended up doing was partnering with a vendor like SANS and using that training to augment what they have, what we would put in place. We would teach them the bare basics. Hey, here's how you make a forensically sound image. Here's how you do chain of custody. Here's how you do all that type of stuff. But that's pretty much all we have time to do to take you away from your day job for 2 months and go away from your family and all that type of stuff. And so then if you want to get beyond that, here's the core classes of SANS that we would recommend, which was 401, 504, 508, and 511. If you could take those 4, we would require them to pass the certification because we wanted to make sure that, hey, we're investing money in them. Don't just go there and hang out and, you know, be on your phone all the time. Listen, absorb the material enough to where you can pass that certification. Then we would feel pretty comfortable that, hey, this person knows at least enough to go out there and, you know, be proficient at what they're doing. I think that's created a lot of the gap, is that just there hasn't been a truly the infrastructure built around academics and putting people into this field. I think that's why you see the big gap in, it's not entry-level positions, it's senior level positions. If you look at what most recruiters are looking for, it's very senior level positions. And I think that's the biggest reason why. That's what I've noticed.
But if you don't start growing up the junior people, you'll never have enough senior people down the road. So, Brian, you have some thoughts?
Yeah, so one thing that was interesting is when we did the announcement at the White House actually approached us and said, could you get a couple stats? So one of the stats was, could you figure out of the jobs that are available in the US, how much are requiring experience versus somebody new to cybersecurity? So we turned to a group called CyberSeek. So CyberSeek actually has the job postings for all cyber jobs here in the US. And I think everybody was a little bit shocked to see the numbers. So over 80% of those jobs required some form of experience. Less than 20% were for somebody that was new. So, which of course brought up the concerns of, well, how do you build a pipeline if literally everybody requires experience?
I once saw David Brown make a comment on that very famously. He said, all we're doing is stealing each other's hubcaps, right? The hubcaps are the very experienced people, and we're just stealing each other's. We got to make some new hubcaps, right? So keep going.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big thing that came out of that, but it even came down to the point where the White House is like, I'm not even sure we want to release that statistic because we don't want the world to know that literally all these jobs now require experience. But they had a big announcement where they were very much where the White House announced that we're now focused on skill-based hiring, right? With the idea that you don't need degrees, you don't need requirements that are around a work experience, things along those lines. So they did kind of fit it in somehow, but it didn't make it into their press release. But that was something that I just thought was a little bit that even after the fact, there was some surprises that came from all of this.
Let me ask you about this because you started talking about that, and I wanted to get a question on it, but I'd like to ask you and then maybe have Karen follow up on it. We hear all the time a headcount gap, 600,000 jobs unfilled here, there. You hear it on a state by state basis, US wide, worldwide. But the study, talks about headcount gap here and there, but really focuses on the skills gap. So can you talk about the difference in meaning of those concepts, skills gap versus headcount gap, what your thoughts are, and how we can address that problem? And then Karen after.
Well, and it was interesting because it wasn't just a skills gap problem, it's what I would call a expectations gap problem. In other words, you had these job recs where I always call them unicorns. They wanted a unicorn, but unicorns only exist, they're pretty rare and they're hard to find. Sometimes I use the analogy of LeBron. I'm originally from Cleveland. So, hey, there's only one LeBron, right, in this world. So the study did talk about how, yes, there's a headcount gap problem, but really it focused more on the skills, but also the expectations of, and like there was some things that came up. So we had Leidos. So Leidos used people that came from the HR, and they talked about, and I know Jay, it came out on yours too, which is, hey, don't find someone that 100% meets the requirements. Find somebody that meets maybe 70%. 80%, you can always train them up, right? Like Jay, I know, and hopefully I'm not speaking out of turn on yours, but like I know on your case study, it very much talked about like the culture, the working with top government agencies. That part, either you have it or you don't, right? The security piece you can bring in.
Yeah, I mean, the way I looked at that is if you go back to any manager and say, hey, who's your strong person? Who do you love? Like who's amazing? It's that person that's so super energetic, wants to learn everything, is passionate about it, and that's the person that they can't live without. Well, if you create the job requisition expecting everything that you need for the role, what opportunity did you give that person to grow into the role? Right? If you want that passionate person, they're only going to come if there's something they're going to learn from that role. So you can't expect that you can do 100% of the job right out of the gate. There's got to be an opportunity to grow into it. Otherwise, you're not getting that person.
Well said. Well said. Karen, your thoughts?
Yes.
Yes.
So many thoughts. We hear a lot of times from employers that they are willing to train up people because for them, it's more important that the person has the foundation of what that industry is doing. So whether it's law enforcement or if it's healthcare or whatever the case may be, that working with those people who have that understanding, that industry understanding is foremost what is being sought after. And then being able to fill out those technical requirements because also I think we have to be realistic. What someone knows in one place isn't necessarily how things are going to happen in another organization. So there are going to be shifts anyhow. So having that foundation of what is it that our mission, what is our mission and can you support that? And you have some of the basic understandings of how to do that in a cyber way. And then we can train you up the rest of the way. I think that's where we're hearing from employers. We're seeing that in different large organizations that have systems like shadowing so that they can bring people in, having lateral moves, not just focusing on the up the ladder, but really looking across who's already here, who can maybe come in and fill these positions rather than always going to that brand new person. And maybe that's partly where that experience can come from. It's not necessarily a cyber security experience, but it's experience in that kind of industry.
That's great. Really appreciate that. Are there any questions from the audience? It looks like the front row. If you could speak loudly so we can hear. I don't think we have a microphone out there for you, but could you speak loudly? What a great question. Let me just summarize the question here. I think we all heard it. Thank you for speaking loudly. But the question was about ageism. And what are we seeing in the research that you all are doing about ageism and its reality in our field? And what can we do to confront that for the over 40 or over 50 or beyond crowd? Brian, I know you've done some stuff with that. I open it up to anybody else that wants to talk, but maybe Brian first.
Yeah, so I'm actually really glad you brought that up because we are starting to put together a 2025 study. So you just gave me an idea of some stuff I should include in it. I'll confess on this particular study, just because we couldn't cover everything, we didn't necessarily had questions about that particular topic. What did come up more was, hiring to the job rec. How do you get the right people in the door? There was a lot of things about culture. In other words, hiring to the right culture necessarily was more important than necessarily hiring to the right skills. And I mean, that may seem like common sense, but the industry very much had failed of like, if it didn't match the job rec, there wasn't jobs available. So when you were talking about that, like your experience with culture and what you bring to the table and things along those lines, I think very much fits in with that, with some of the stuff that you talked about. I'll admit, at least about ageism, we did hear a little bit more of, hey, I graduated from college. I spent, a fortune on my degree in cybersecurity. And I keep hearing that there's a $5 billion headcount gap problem and I can't find a job.
Yeah.
So we actually heard it more from I'm graduated from college and how come I keep hearing about this big headcount gap problem and I can't find a job. But
Well,
I'd love to hear.
I will tell you though, just 3 times in the last 2 months, I've had people come to me in their 50s and say, hey, I've gotten laid off. I've got great IT experience and I'd like to get into this cybersecurity thing. What could I do? And I personally advise and coach them. And sometimes I call my friend Jay Belodia saying, hey, Jay, what do you think on that? So Jay, did you want to comment on that since I've sent some of that your way?
Yeah, I think the accountability there falls to us as leaders and hiring managers. And the more we look for a particular experience, the more we create a tougher situation there for those that maybe have industry experience but not security experience. I think we have to acknowledge that people that have excelled in IT, tangential organizations, other areas, they bring a lot to the table in their leadership, their ability to navigate dynamic situations, to pick things up fast, and it's got to be a part of the hiring and requisition process. But we also have to be open-minded as managers. You use the term unicorn. If we keep going unicorn hunting, then we're just buying each other's talent, and we need to be able to identify how do we build a sustainable model. There's a lady that got up at a session at DEF CON and she said, I had this opportunity to either go to security or to go to app dev when I came out of school. I decided to go app dev, but security is really passion for me. And I can't now get the same position that I could have gotten out of college. Because there's this expectation that you're a certain seniority and that hey, maybe you're more advanced than this position requires. So I would say there's a mindset shift that we need to have, that if something is entry level, that doesn't matter how many years of experience that person has. It matters what are they capable of doing, willing to do. And I also think we need to reframe like what entry level looks like. There should be entry level experienced and entry level new to the workforce. Having been in the workforce, you bring a set of capabilities that allows you to get to speed much faster. So I think that's a mindset shift that our hiring managers need to have.
Karen, you want to close us out on this topic? And then I have one last one for you guys to get ready for. I'll need 30 seconds from each of you, a takeaway. One thing that everybody here should focus on. So get ready for that. Karen, if you could close us out on the ageism discussion.
I was going to say, I think it maybe is more of a focus that we're seeing across diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility overall. So we're seeing it not just with age, but with all sorts of diversity of experiences, whether it's, background or sex, whatever the case may be. And I mean, right now with federal government, we are seeing a very, our population is primarily white, male and old. And so that's an issue. And then how do we extend in this pipeline so that we can bring more people in? We will not be able to be effective at cybersecurity if we do not have diversity of thought. And that's really important. And I think that we're starting to see leadership really embrace that. And it's now about how do we bring that in that's not going to be putting up barriers by requiring maybe too many degrees in fields that maybe aren't even relevant anymore. What is that is happening now is not necessarily what happened 5 years ago. This is a constantly changing environment that requires constant continuing education. And so it's really, I think, needs to be looking at all of those different components.
Well said. Thank you. All right, 30 seconds. I am timing it. So one takeaway from each of you. We'll start with Jay and work our way back to Brian.
If you're a manager, invest in your people. If you're a member of the team, invest in yourself. There's sometimes this context of, if I send this person here, if I invest in them, if they train, they're going to just leave for higher salary. I found the exact opposite. When you give people support, sponsorship, and really challenging, cool work in security, they stick around. So invest in your people is the one thing I would say.
That's powerful. Thank you. Austin.
Say one thing, we hear about mentoring a lot. Make it formal on your team. And more importantly, create experiential-based learning for your soft skills, for your people skills, for your technical. We're already doing that with technical. So use that same style of how we experience it. We try to fail with coaching practice, with active listening class, with negotiation amongst us. Like all of those are practicable skills. Don't just send them to some conceptual training.
That's great. And I listen to what you guys tell me. This mentor thing, I instituted a mentor program in my team about 6 months ago, and it's going very well. Thank you. So yes, Matt, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I'd like to address my comments probably to people who are looking to break in to fill that gap at the 20% or lower. I get the question a lot is like, hey, I really want to get into cybersecurity. What should I do? And I would say I would pursue, don't get discouraged, pursue cybersecurity, not just as a 9-to-5 endeavor. Really immerse yourself in it, be constantly learning. It's such a dynamic and ever-changing field that in order to stay up with everything going on, it requires a lot of effort on your part. And the candidates that I would interview, those that I would interview where I would ask them a specific question like, hey, do you have experience in this? And they would say, not directly due to work or in college or whatever, but I built a home lab. I took it upon myself to learn how to pen test or whatever. It shows the person interviewing you or the hiring official that, hey, this person has taken upon themselves to go out and learn new things and really have that type of aptitude.
That's great, man. Build a home lab, participate in CTFs, that kind of stuff is awesome. Karen, 30 seconds.
Surveys and studies like this are so important. We aren't going to be able to effectively manage and build our workforce without having the data behind it, without learning from each other and being able to see these leading practices that others can imitate and take on. But I would point out that this is an ecosystem. This is all of us working together. And it's also understanding that cybersecurity is not just a one size fits all. There is cybersecurity across an organization. It's an interdisciplinary field, which is going to come up in, leadership areas and legal areas, in different kinds of management areas with workforce development, all sorts of different fields. We have 7 different categories of work roles with 52 work roles, and thinking of it broadly speaking and understanding that this is a core part of most of what our organizations do nowadays is going to be important to move us ahead.
Well said. Well said. So Brian, I'll give you 30 seconds, but I want to direct it a little bit.
Okay.
So the workforce study came out in, I believe, April, the one we're talking about here, of 2024. People should read it. It's only 20-minute read. It's great. You'll love it. Tell us what the plan is going forward. With the current study as well as into 2025, you have 28 seconds.
Okay, so with the 2025 study, there's actually a whole bunch of new topics that we're looking to do. We wanted to talk more about mentorships, apprenticeships. We were going to talk about security budgets. We were going to talk about career paths because that was something that really, so in some ways, take what we learned from the 2024 and the areas that people really I think kind of really picked up and kind of run with that. So actually yours, the one that you brought up was something that's now going through my mind. So I appreciate you offering that advice for the next years. So, part of the goal is, Ed, I know you're going to be an advisor on this is, we've done it once. Now, how do we improve it and make it bigger and better?
And we are open to input, like the
Yeah,
good input
absolutely.
from you. So thank you so much. Hey, folks, let's give a round of applause to our panelists. Thank you for sharing. You guys are wonderful. I hope we can do this again sometime. All right. Thanks so much. So be on the lookout for the 2024 one. There's a flyer in front of the room that you could pick up. It's got a QR code on it. It is a safe QR code. It won't hack you. And some descriptions of some of the ideas that we shared here. It's on the flyer. Secondly, be on the lookout for that 2025 workforce study coming out probably first or second quarter next year.
April 2025.
April 2025.